All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us. We have today with us historian, ranger, and now I believe also a curator here at the Ulysses S. Grant Center, Mr. Nick Sacco. So thank you so much for your time today and joining us. So part of this interview series is to get a better grasp on the many things you can do with a history degree or even a history adjacent degree. And so I thought we'd start out today just by asking you a little bit about your background. So kind of, where are you from? And then what started leading you on your path to being interested in history?
Well, sure. Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm from the St. Louis area, so I'm born and raised here. And fairly typical upbringing in the St. Louis suburbs. Went to going to school. Kind of developed an interest in history from a pretty young age. I was always a really voracious reader, always wanting to learn new things. And I'd say probably around like middle school, I really started to kind of gravitate towards history and just really having questions about the world and the way the world works, and questions about the human condition, and finding that history provided a lot of insights into better understanding society as a whole. And so growing up, the 1990s and the 2000s, back then the History Channel actually had history on the TV. So I remember watching a lot of series about things like World War II. There was this interesting series about all the presidents. There's an actor who's not around anymore, but his name's Edward Herman, and he was the narrator for all of these History Channel series. And he even picked up the nickname the History Channel guy because he did the voiceovers for all of these shows. I remember watching growing up. But then, reading a lot of pop history, your Stephen Ambrose, your David McCullough, James McPherson, and that sort of thing. And the goal originally was to be a history teacher in a high school setting. And that is partly because I felt like that was the only option I really had for somebody that wanted to pursue a career in history. And just by luck, I went to Lindenwood for my undergrad degree. In my last year at Lindenwood, I got an internship with the National Park Service, and it really kind of changed the course of my future goals in my career. So we can certainly jump into that a little bit more as we continue the conversation. But I went from history education to public history.
Okay, yeah, no, it's I won't say it's like a common trajectory, but it is. I have heard other people, kind of taking that path.
Yes.
Interesting that you mentioned middle school. That was sort of when I started developing historical consciousness too. I had teachers who used to bring in mystery objects from antique stores and make us guess what they were.
Interesting.
It was a really great tactic. So I remember I had some really standout history teachers during that process that really, really helped me, I'd say, kind of crystallize my interest. Were there any people along the way who helped you sort of narrow your path or focus yourself?
Definitely. I think for me, with my history teachers, I learned from all of them, both in good ways and bad, to be honest. I think a lot of us have had history teachers who were coaches, and that's not inherently a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. I would say, especially given that the schools have all sorts of extracurricular needs.
Yes.
You want to keep students involved and active, and it takes doing a lot more than just teaching in the classroom, and I totally respect that. But I think a lot of the history teachers that I initially interacted with, it was more about the coaching than the history. And give you a workbook, you do the workbook, multiple choice on the test, nothing that really got you to really think critically about history. But my senior year of high school, there was a gentleman, his name was Dennis Meritz, and Mr. Meritz was really the first coach that was really a teacher before a coach. And his passion for history just really seeped through every day. It was just always so excited to go to his class. And it was a Western civilization class, and I mean, he could talk about the Greeks and the Romans to Charlemagne. I mean, anything in Western civilization, he would be able to just bring that history to life. And so I think he was just one of those people that really convinced me that this was what I wanted to do. And while I did not end up being a history teacher in the classroom, I still feel like I'm sort of extending that mission through my public history work as well. There's still ways to share your passion for history with other people. And so, Mr. Merritt's is just, one of those influences that made a big difference for me for sure.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Similar story. Wonderful high school history teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you've also seen other models that maybe didn't work as well. And
Sure.
so you learn from that as well. It's also
Absolutely.
instructive. So you mentioned earlier that you were able to secure an internship, and that sort of, I'm sensing that that's maybe a key link towards your move towards public history. What else sort of inspired you towards public history? And if you can talk more about that internship too, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, the internship was here at Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site, and so it really piqued my interest in a number of different ways. I had never, having an interest in history, I never really studied the Civil War all that much. And so I became very intrigued by Ulysses S. Grant's story, and I became intrigued by the Civil War era as a period of time that had a lot to say about our way of life today, our society today. And the more I read, the more fascinated I became by the period. But I think also just the people that were around me here, the rangers that were here, these were people that were very passionate about their job. They were doing the reading, they were having conversations with each other, they were having conversations with other historians and other people in the Park Service, and it was a way of doing history that I found myself wanting to get to that level.
Yeah.
And so I found that I had a lot of room for creativity. I had a lot of room to do research in my own way and to tell Grant's story in my own way. And the idea of interacting with different people every day was very interesting to me. And so what I mean by that is, in a classroom setting, you kind of have a set thing. You're a fourth grade teacher. You are a teacher of government class or civics. Here, you work with people of all different ages, all different experiences, all different backgrounds. And so that challenge of kind of meeting people where they are, whether that's somebody that has a 0 interest level and you're trying to bump them up to a 1 or a 2, or somebody who's an 8 or 9 and trying to get them up to a 10. I loved that challenge of just different people coming to the park every single day, and to a certain extent kind of learning about their lives too. Whether they're from St. Louis or people from Japan, Spain, England. I mean, people from all over the world have found themselves at this park wanting to learn about Grant's story, and so that aspect of it was very exciting as well. And so in addition to all of that, in reading more about public history, I began to better understand that there are people with historical backgrounds that are working in museums, they're working at libraries, they're working at historical societies, and so the idea of finding a role within this public history setting became very exciting for me.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions about history is that it's a dead subject, and that when truthfully it's changing all the time. Not only because we're discovering new sources, but also because we have maybe perhaps more enlightened approaches to certain topics now. But what you're describing too is a very vibrant, living community of scholars, who are working to translate a pretty intense historical topic to a really wide variety of people.
Sure, and even here within the context of St. Louis, you think of people with historical backgrounds who are working at the Gateway Arch, the other national park site here in St. Louis, the Missouri History Museum, all the small historic house museums.
And Scott Joplin and all that.
Absolutely, it's Scott Joplin with Missouri State Parks. I mean, these are all places that need somebody with that historical expertise to come in and help tell the story. And what I think is powerful about public history, that speaks to the power of history more broadly, is the different ways that communities can participate in the making of history, in the preservation of history. And to just give one example, the National Park Service manages the National Register of Historic Places. And the National Register is, it is something where buildings that are either, they might be architecturally significant, there might be an event that took place there, or a famous person who lived there. But it's a registry of more than 90,000 historic structures, and almost every county in America has at least one entry in the National Register. And really the vast majority of those structures that were nominated and added to the National Register, those are just community members that just cared about history. They didn't have a fancy history background in terms of their, they didn't go to graduate school. Their studies may have ended in high school with history, but they understood the value of it, and they worked to get a historic structure in their community onto the National Register. Just a couple years ago, Father Dixon Cemetery, which is an African American cemetery, only about 2 miles away from the park here, just folks who cared about the history put together a nomination, and it's on the National Register now. And so I think that really highlights the ways that it's scholars and professional historians, but it's just community members who want to participate and help out in their own way too.
Yeah, that's really phenomenal. Yeah, and anyone can get involved. Anyone can be interested in history. That's really exciting. So you've described kind of the intellectual environment here at the site, which sounds really dynamic and fun. Can you tell us a little bit more about your day-to-day, what you do? I gather it changes day-to-day, but a broad overview.
Sure, yeah, that's the fun aspect of this current job. Being the historian and curator here is that the one consistent thing is that it's never consistent. It's always changing. And there's a handful of different sort of categories, I would say, that I kind of work in. So one of the big aspects, of course, is museum exhibits. So we have a full museum here with 6 permanent galleries, and we're always working on temporary galleries as well. So we do have a temporary traveling exhibit about the history of slavery in St. Louis. I was the lead curator on it. It was a big collaborative effort. That debuted in February of 2023 last year, and we had it here at the park for about 9 months, and now it's traveling to different sites throughout the St. Louis area. We've done other temporary exhibits in our visitor center. We had a particularly exciting one a few years ago about national parks, where we introduced sort of the origins of the National Park Service, and then we had people write out a short comment of what their favorite moment was at a national park. Doing stuff like that is a lot of fun. So exhibit label writing, finding artifacts within our collections, and putting those artifacts to use to tell a story. As curators, we're not just putting artifacts out because they look cool. There's got to be a theme. There's got to be some sort of interpretive strand that kind of keeps everything together. So exhibit design and management is certainly one aspect of my work. Historic preservation is another aspect. With the Ulysses S. Grant's home, Whitehaven, the house that we manage here, it's our primary resource. It's more than 200 years old. And in the 1960s, there was a law passed called the Historic Preservation Act of 1966, and there's a law in the books that mandates that there's a compliance process that we have to follow to ensure long-term preservation of historic structures. So basically, to just give you one example, we recently had to do some work on the foundation of the home. And we just can't go in and start doing work on the foundation, or putting in a bunch of modern stuff that doesn't fit the aesthetic of the home.
Sure.
So there's a compliance process that we follow, where we ensure that we're using appropriate materials. We do our best to do the restoration in a way that aligns with the techniques that they would have used at the time in the 19th century, and ensuring that as much of the original fabric of the home can be maintained as possible. So any sort of work that we do, whether it's on the park grounds or on a structure, everything goes through what's called the Section 106 process. So I'm the coordinator, and it's just essentially it's a form of checks and balances to ensure that we're not just tearing into stuff
Sure.
without going through the appropriate process to ensure that we all are on the same page. And it doesn't necessarily pertain to us as much. But there are obviously many sites that are connected to indigenous history. And so there's a whole separate aspect, it's called NAGPRA, and the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. And that is put in place to ensure that if Native American artifacts are found, especially if there's human remains, that we repatriate and return those artifacts in a timely process. So not is directly relevant to what we're doing at Ulysses S. Grant, but it is something that we need to be aware of as well.
Certainly, one reads about the Smithsonian, and there are controversies there.
Absolutely.
And we're in 2024, but we still are constantly striving, I think, to do better. By our history.
Absolutely. So that preservation work is really important. We have a collection of more than 700 artifacts connected to Grant's life. So managing and caring for those artifact collections, certainly very important. We also have a research library consisting of more than 4,000 books. So looking over those books and assisting our staff. And sometimes we have outside researchers who come in, helping them find resources that they're looking for. Doing historical research, of course, still reading a lot and writing about history. And of course, just doing some public outreach as well, doing programs in the community, educating people not just about our park, but about the Civil War period as a whole. So those are sort of the broad categories of what goes in an average day here.
Average, right?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's really fascinating. My next question has to do with, I think there's a meme that circulated an eon ago about what people think I do and what I actually do.
Yes.
So I know there's a lot of misconceptions about historians, but what would you say is the biggest misconception people have about your job as a park ranger, or really what a park ranger does, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. The absolute number one misperception, I would say, is that the idea that all that park rangers do is around nature.
Okay.
So, we're there to talk about the importance of protecting the environment. And people think Smokey the Bear is from the Park Service. He's not. He's from the U.S. Forest Service, actually. So he's not even part of our agency, but you put that hat on and you're Smokey the Bear.
Pros and cons to that, I'm sure.
Sure, absolutely. And to a certain extent, too, this happens more so with children. Children think that we're law enforcement.
Ah, yeah.
The park rangers are wearing the badge, and that gives them the idea that all of park rangers are law enforcement. The reality is that there are a lot of history-minded folks that are in this field that are working for the National Park Service. And today, as of this recording, the Park Service has 428 units all throughout the country. And people might be surprised to learn that more than 50% of those sites are a history-oriented site.
Interesting.
A Civil War battlefield, a National Historic Site, a National Historic Park. Now, of course, there's those lines blend. There are sites that are more oriented towards nature, sites more oriented towards history, and a lot of sites try to blend a little bit of both. So I don't want to make a false dichotomy here, but in terms of their mission statement and their purpose, more sites are oriented on educating people about history than nature, and I think that probably surprises a lot of people to hear that. So when I try to explain that, I'm just a history guy, I'm just a history enthusiast that got into this field, I am not going to be prepared to start talking about the wildlife and the fauna and all the because I'm going to talk about the Civil War period.
Right.
So I think those are some of the pretty big misconceptions. But at the end of the day, we're in the history business, we're in the education business for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you. All right then. What would you say is the most fun part of your job?
There's a lot that's very exciting, but I think seeing the excitement in others is always very inspiring for me, because it shows that the work that we're doing has meaning and value to the American public and to people from all over the world who visit national park sites. And I'll just give a simple example, a recent example. But I was visiting with some fifth graders, and I went to their school and I brought a couple artifacts from our collection to highlight examples of different sources that historians might use to study the past. And I brought a photo that we have of Grant, and the photo was taken in 1865. And I asked the students to tell me what's the first thing that you notice that sticks out the most. And so a couple students gave some answers, and I mentioned, because nobody had noticed, that Grant was wearing a mourning band around his arm because President Lincoln had just been killed and he was in mourning for President Lincoln. But I had this picture on a PowerPoint slide, and then I went through my stuff and I pulled out the original photo, and all the kids sort of gasped because they weren't expecting to see that original photo in my hands. And it just sort of showed me, it was just like, wow, that really resonated with the students. That, it wasn't just on the computer screen on a PowerPoint, but like, this is a real document that we care for. And so it's little moments like that that I find really exciting about the job, and just hearing from people who appreciate learning about history. I think ultimately at the end of the day, what we do in the Park Service is we're just trying to get those light bulbs to go off, so that people can go on their own learning journey and continue filling their curiosity after they visit the park. That's what we're trying to do at the end of the day.
Well, it's like you said, you're in the education business, really. That's phenomenal. Now, I often think about how, everything is digitized now, it seems like. And so the power of the original document, of those primary sources, is they still reveal so much the more that we go back to them. So that's really fun, and you got the odd opportunity to have that revelatory moment for fifth graders.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So we've heard about the most fun part. So what's the hardest thing about your job?
There's a couple things that kind of stick out, just sort of on a personal level. I've been in this role as a historian curator for a little over a year at this point, but I've been at this park for about 10 years full time. So kind of go back to what we talked about earlier. I did end up going to graduate school. I went to Indiana University for my master's, and when I finished that, I was fortunate to get on full time here. And so I really started at the bottom. Every day consisted of working the front desk, giving tours, and really just being that public-facing ranger. The weekend warrior here every weekend. And I don't have to work weekends for the most part now, which is nice, but I don't get as much interaction with the public as I used to.
Sure.
There's a lot more sitting at my desk and staring at a computer screen. And so it's just getting accustomed to just being on the computer more. And I do little things, sometimes I'll just do a quick lap around Grant's home just to get a few steps in. And standing desk is great. If you don't have a standing desk, get one so you can stand up sometimes. So that's just like a minor thing that, I'm just staring at screens a lot more than I used to. But I would say that for me, the historic preservation side, the Section 106 side, is the steepest learning curve.
Sure.
Because there's just there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of steps you have to go through. It is a very tedious process, and it's not always the most exciting, but at the end of the day, it's very important work. But for me, I think that's the steepest learning curve so far, has been just trying to get my head around the compliance process.
That sounds like a process that has a lot of tiny boxes and checks and
Yes.
lots of data.
Yes, absolutely, and just being thorough with it so that the people who have to give the approval higher up have as much information at their disposal to make a decision.
Yeah, I think that's one of the advantages of being kind of a history-minded person, is because it does really train you to process lots of information, lots of data, and so you have to be. It really trains you to become very quick at analysis.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. So you've had this wonderful career that you talked about. You know, you've done public history. You've done this entire site. You know, from, as you said earlier, from in the kind of entry level position now to kind of to the top. So what sort of advice might you give to somebody who is interested in getting involved in a career in public history?
Sure. For me, when I was an undergrad, it was just that advisor who pointed me in the direction, encouraging me to think about the National Park Service rather than going into the classroom. And I think for college students, kind of keeping an open mind when it comes to your options, and thinking about possible career avenues outside of teaching, and trying to become a little more educated about what's going on in the field. So a great organization to kind of learn more about would be the National Council on Public History. NCPH has a lot of resources on their website about what public history is, featuring professionals in the field highlighting the work that they do. So becoming acquainted with the different types of work in public history is very important. Specific to the Park Service or federal agencies more broadly, you know, let's say U.S. Forest Service or Fish and Wildlife, everything is under one umbrella. So we have one hiring website called USA Jobs, and that's where the federal government posts their job openings. But for active students, there is a program, it's for active students in military veterans, it's called Pathways. Students can apply to get into the Pathways program, and the Park Service will try to work with you to get an internship. And for many of us, having that Pathways internship was our pathway into getting a career with the Park Service. Several of us here at this park were in the Pathways program. And many of our staff are military veterans, and like I said, they can use the Pathways program too, to get into the service as well. But it's important that if you're an undergrad student or a graduate, but especially if you're undergraduate, really try to start looking into this. I'd say kind of halfway through your training. You know, your freshman years really focus on just getting acclimated with your studies, but one of our rangers here, she got into the Pathways program. She's 21 years old now, but I believe she was a junior when she got an internship with us, and now we're trying to get her on the path to get a permanent job with the Park Service. So start looking sooner than later in the Pathways program for internships. You know, I think that's really important, and it's certainly for me. I was at the tail end of my time at Lindenwood, but I got real lucky, and I got in the system, so to speak, to benefit me. Would also recommend, volunteering. Volunteer at a park and just learn about the operation and see what's going on. Get to know the people and get acclimated to what life is like working in public history. It's a great way. You know, once or twice a month, just come in and work the front desk and get used to it. Likewise, several people who have worked at this park started as volunteers and eventually got hired on. So that's an important consideration as well. Probably on a bigger scale, especially for graduate school, get involved with NCPH, and there's another organization, ASLH, American Association for State and Local History. Those are the two primary public history or membership organizations. Go to their conferences. See about presenting at conferences. Kind of build up your CV and really start networking with people in the field. So that's more of a graduate school concern, but really do that. I mean, I tried to get to any concert I could, and just to make those connections. I went to Vista Print and printed out these, nice little business cards, and we're handing them out.
I did the same thing when I was in grad school.
Yeah, absolutely, and it works. It really does work. And I made a habit. If I ever went to a conference, I always made a habit of, when I watched the presentation of a particular panel or what have you, I would either ask a question during the panel, or I would go up to one of the presenters after the session and introduce myself. And I did that every time, just to make those connections with people in the field. So
Yeah.
those are a couple things that I would probably recommend